The world's on fire. Our river's gone dry. The rich are getting richer. They've left us out here to die. Mass migration. We got no place to hide. Who's against us? Who's on our side? Are they too dumb or are they just in on it? Liars and cheaters, a red-hot grip. Ditch the gaslighting gas bag that speaks in code. He's a faker, a shaker, a pontificating pantload. In this house of mirrors, we've hit the wall before it's too late. Let's go. Come on, y'all. It's border to border and coast to coast. It's real, it's facts, and it ain't no hoax. It's Podcast by George, and it's showtime, folks. Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another Podcast by George. Well, we're doing a special live recording, which is kind of an oxymoron, I guess, but I'm trying to bypass some internet issues that I've been having here this week. And I mean, it's been a trial and tribulation for me, folks. I don't think it's going to get squared away until at least next week, but hopefully this recording will turn out right so that we can get to this, because I mean, there are so many issues going on right now. Well, a couple of things I've got lined up in the hopper. Joe Gorton from Brady United wants to come on the show to talk about this horrific situation in Nashville with this shooting again with these assault rifles. My God, we've talked about that. It's just going to continue unless we do something, folks. And then, of course, the weather. What in the hell is going on with the weather, folks? Yeah, Dr. William Gallis at Iowa State University is going to come on. Here in Iowa, I think our forecast for the end of this week includes parts of the state being in a winter weather advisory. Snow. The rest of the state is going to be in some kind of a tornado watch or something like that. I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's extremely uncommon. And of course, the point is it's more often occurring now because of climate change, climate, war, and healthcare. That's what we talk about on Podcast by George. But today we're going to be talking all about war with our good buddy, our good pal. And of course, that is Brad Wolf. He's the executive director and founder of Peace Action Network in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He's a former prosecutor, lawyer, and community college dean, and he heads up the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. And, it's kind of like what I was talking about with the climate and the weather. There are people that have been forecasting and predicting that this was going to be happening, and people still aren't paying attention to them. They still don't believe them. Well, it's the same thing with these issues of war. People like Brad have been talking about this escalation, the situation in Ukraine, what's going on around the world, and saying, if that happens, this will happen. If that happens, this will happen. And guess what? It is. It's a kind of a set of dominoes, and it's happening out there, folks. Let's take that off the screen and welcome him on in here, add him to the broadcast, and click a button here and bring him in full screen like that. Good morning, Brad Wolf.
Good morning, George. Nice to see you again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about what I was saying there? Does it occur to you that way? I tell people on my show all the time, why you go to the racetrack, you read the racing form, you go with past performance, you try to pick winners based on what they've done. People will bet their entire life savings that way. But when it comes to climate, war, and healthcare, it's like nobody's reading the racing form. And when I look at this situation in Ukraine, my God, they're going to kill us all if they're not careful. And this is exactly what you've been warning about.
You know, it is. A year ago, when the Ukraine war began, we started talking about these very issues, about escalation, about proxy warfare, about the danger of nukes. And now here we are a year later, and look at the armaments we're sending, $113 billion to the Ukraine in aid, much of it, who knows where it went at this point. The United Kingdom is sending depleted uranium shells to Ukraine. We've got Russian jets that are interfering with U.S. drones over the Crimea. This thing is escalating quickly. Putin, of course, recently stated he's going to deploy tactical nukes in Belarus. This all happened in a year, and you could look at the website of any peace group from a year ago, and this is what they would have told you was going to happen, this kind of escalation.
And I'm going with the winner myself. I'm going with these people that were proven correct. The other part of it is, and we're going to get into that maybe a little bit. I've got an Associated Press article coming up where they've interviewed Zelensky. Of course, they never go to somebody on the left. They never go to one of these peace activists that, again, have been correct right on down the line my entire lifetime. I mean, why wouldn't you put somebody like that into the conversation? Just acknowledging the fact that they were correct about that. So why perhaps couldn't they be correct about this? But let's do a little housekeeping here. I want to bring this up on screen to start with here so that I don't forget. This is the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal website, folks. And peeking out there a little bit is some artwork from my buddy, our pal, Carol Hartman out there. But this is what I wanted to bring up because it's upcoming. It's this Earth Day action. Talk about this, Brad.
Yeah, so the Merchants of Death Tribunal actually is going to be presented in November, but we've got events leading up to it throughout the year. And a number of peace organizations have initiated their own actions. And so this Earth Day action is going to take place in Syracuse, New York. And it's a 2-day action. It's fascinating. They're going to be delivering subpoenas and contempt citations for the tribunal to investment banks in their area, to Senators Schumer and Gillibrand. They're going to be delivering it to the Catholic diocese and asking the bishop there to testify before the tribunal because the diocese has their parish funds and diocesan funds invested in firms that are supporting munitions companies. So they've got a full day of political theater and action planned. One of the members is going to be dressing as Pope Francis and delivering, a speech on peace outside of the diocesan office to try to compel some reaction from the public and get into the conversation, as you mentioned, get some acknowledgement that there is another way here, that there's a way we've been talking about for a long time that is not escalation and war, but is diplomacy. My big concern, the concern of most peace groups, is that this proxy war in Ukraine is just a testing ground for the ultimate war with China. The Pentagon's testing out its weapons. Weapons manufacturers are testing out their latest. And it seems the Pentagon is determined to wage war with China, and Ukraine and the Ukrainian people are the testing ground.
Yeah, and again, that's April 22nd and 23rd, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and here's this made me think of you immediately. This was in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week. The Pentagon is seeking to enlist Silicon Valley startups in its effort to fund and develop new weapons technology and more nimble suppliers as the U.S. races to keep pace with China's military advances. Well, I don't know. I'm an old lefty. I'm a peacenik. I look at this and I think, my God, if we were singing Kumbaya and trying to get along with issues of trade and all these other things with China that they're trying to accomplish with their Road and Belt Initiative, I don't know that this military advance underlined in this article would even be occurring, Brad. But I mean, that's the way the article starts. It says the push is to tap private capital coming in the midst of concern that the U.S. defense industry consolidation has led to dependence on a few large companies. And these are the folks that are targeted by the War Crimes Tribunal, these large companies that rely on government funding for research and hampering innovation. Innovation of competitive weaponry. Meanwhile, China has pulled ahead in some key technologies ranging from small drones to hypersonic missiles. And of course, this hypersonic missile thing's a huge concern. Who's the world's biggest promulgator of drones? The United States. This again is a head shaker for me, Brad. I'm living in a house of mirrors, pal. Talk about this one.
Well, if you look at the wording of that article, that Wall Street Journal, it says, quote, help to keep pace with China, right?
Yes.
China's advances, military advances. So this is all ginned up to make us fear and have great concern about what's going on with China. And this is the Wall Street Journal. They slip this kind of language in here to instill fear and concern so that it becomes a given for Americans to say, well, sure, China is the instigator of problems out there. This recent agreement that the United States has with Australia over the submarines. The idea is we're going to put all these submarines, sell them to Australia to keep the sea lanes open between Australia and China. And the irony of this is that China is Australia's #1 trading partner. So why would China block the sea lanes going to Australia, one of their enormous trading partners? The effort is clearly for the United States to try to control those seas and manipulate commerce in that area. It's not to prevent China from closing those sea lanes down. So the language in the newspapers is very telling, I think. When you read the New York Times and you read Wall Street Journal and everything else, it's very telling language. It's all war propaganda, the yellow journalism going back to the Hearst Empire and ginning up war fever.
Yeah, and I always encourage everybody to remember now that all of these, yeah, I think about every single war has been found to have been fought under a false pretense, a false flag, most notably Iraq. Who was behind, who was cheerleading those wars all the way? Those folks. Remember the racing form that I told you about, folks? They've been wrong about this all the way down the line. And so let me bring Brad's seen this before. I have this on screen all the time. The great movie Casino. Are they too dumb or are they in on it? I don't show the film clip very often because it's copyrighted material, obviously, coming out of Hollywood. But my God, watch that scene in there where the slot machines get rolled 2 times in a row. And Robert De Niro goes to the slot machine manager and says, what the hell? This can't ever happen statistically to begin with. It happened to you twice in a row. Did you not see what was going on? And the guy tries to excuse himself and he says, now, wait a minute. You're adding an insult to an injury here, basically. You're either too dumb where you actually did believe that, or you're in on it. Those are the only 2 options. And it's the same way with the media. In either event, you can't work here. And from an American's perspective, that should mean when you're looking at these media sources that have been wrong right down the line, that means you can't be believed. You have to be looked at skeptically and with a very jaundiced eye. And you need to go to the people that have been correct. And I would recommend the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal as one good example of that, Brad.
Yeah, the New York Times has supported every American war for the last 100 years. There's not a war that they don't like. So, yeah, they're in on it. They're part of the military, industrial, media complex, without a doubt. And in terms of do they know, I was reading an article today about Al-Shabaab, which is causing so many difficulties in Africa. And the Al-Shabaab was a creation after the U.S. backed the Ethiopia's invasion of Somalia. Al-Shabaab appears. And so I started to think, does the military, are they really that dumb that they don't realize there's going to be this blowback? Or are they intentionally creating enemies to perpetuate endless war? We've done that with ISIS and with everybody else. So maybe we always need an enemy, and maybe the intention is to create these enemies.
Yeah, because it's big business. There's a lot of money in it. That goes all the way back to my youth, reading Steinbeck and that type of thing. I mean, there are people that actually want this stuff for money. It's hard to believe. People like Brad and I find that hard to believe anyway, but that is a truth and has always been that way. Well, I wanted to move along here. I wanted to get some things up on screen that are going on right now. Well, okay, let's start here. Because you mentioned this in your opening, Brad, these uranium shells, these depleted uranium shells going into Ukraine. Now, that kind of just moves along under the radar. It gets mentioned in some stories, but this is, what the hell is that all about?
Yeah, depleted uranium, this is nuclear warfare that we have been engaging in for decades. It's just under a different name. Depleted uranium is the nuclear waste that's left over from making nuclear bombs. It's uranium, and it's categorized as nuclear waste, which means it's still highly radioactive, very toxic. And because it's more dense than lead, they can form it into bullets and artillery shells, and it can penetrate tanks, which is what they've been doing. So they use it to penetrate tanks. It travels at enormous speeds. Once it penetrates the metal of a tank, it incinerates everybody inside the tank. But even more concerning is the fact that the uranium itself becomes airborne. And so it gets into the soil, it gets into the water table. And for years after, this radioactivity becomes a problem for the civilians living in the area. We used it in 1991 in the Gulf War. And after that initial use of those depleted uranium shells in 91, the incidence of leukemia among children increased 600% in Iraq. So it's been used in Kosovo by us, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and now the United Kingdom has sent these shells to Ukraine to be used against Russia. And this is very dangerous because the Ukrainian people are going to pay the price because they're going to be used on Ukrainian land. And so the remnants of this radioactivity is going to be there for decades. And the half-life of depleted uranium is 4 billion years. 4 billion, that's the age of the planet.
My God, it's just and it's like, well, nobody knew this was going to happen. Oh, the hell. Brad knew that it was, I mean, months ago on my show, one of the things I talked about was the beauty of the nation of Ukraine. It is the breadbasket of that part of the world, folks. We're talking about idyllic, beautiful especially an old farmer like me. I mean, Ukraine is a beautiful land. It is poisoned forever. And they're talking about cluster bombs. We're going to get to that a little bit. But I wanted to stay on this nuclear issue because I saw this article from CNBC. Again, they kind of follow the money, folks. Outrage with plan for tactical nukes in Belarus. A Ukrainian town now post-apocalyptic. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. This beautiful land of Ukraine. This town is described as post-apocalyptic. Russia provoked outrage with its plan to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, as announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin over the weekend. Putin said Saturday that a deal had been struck with his ally, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, to station tactical nukes on Belarusian territory, and that Russia had already moved 10 aircraft to the country that are capable of carrying tactical nuclear weapons. And I've got this article from Defense One. A Russian tactical nuke wouldn't confer much battlefield advantage, experts say. And this talks about the military angle of this. Instead of getting deeply into that, I'm just going to recommend everybody go to that website. And the interesting thing about this, I don't know if you've ever visited this site before, Brad, but you can put in a location, kind of like Google Maps, as an example. Click a button. Find the kind of button or find the kind of weapon that you want to have detonated, say a tactical nuclear weapon, and it will show you the damage that occurs immediately. And then it will, of course, if it's airborne, it will show the drift. You put in Kiev, it'll show you the effect of a tactical nuclear weapon blast there, killing everybody within, I don't know, so many miles of a range, tens of thousands of deaths and that type of thing. And then the wind drift. Moving towards Russia, which some people say is one of the biggest reasons that Russia won't blow one of these things off or will not use them in Ukraine, is because the blowback literally blows back on them because of the prevailing wind. That map will show you the wind coming out of the southwest, which is prevailing, I believe, for this time of year. But I just overall, to go back to this, Brad, when I saw this thing, I think of the Libyan solution. When these countries all get pressed into corners because of the hegemony of the United States, they always fall back on the last resort to defend or protect themselves, or maybe you don't even want to look at it in that context, but it's these damned nuclear weapons. And I look at that tactical nuclear weapon article and think exactly that.
Yeah, it's they talk about this in such casual language, Pentagon and the media and everybody else, that it's a tactical nuclear weapon, as if it's not really a normal nuclear weapon. It's an enormously powerful nuclear weapon. And though it, quote, provoked outrage in that article you just showed, no mention in mainstream media when this happened was there the fact that the United States has had tactical nuclear weapons stationed in Western Europe aimed at Russia for years. It's as if Russia's doing something that the United States has not been doing for many, many years. So this all moving nuclear weapons around, this is terrifying. We're talking about the end of Western civilization if this happens, and it's just being done in too cavalier of a manner.
Yeah, cavalier. And of course, there's always the accidental component. And people think, oh, these guys couldn't accident. Yeah, they can. Hell, it's been done before. Just Google accidental atomic bomb or something like that. They've had planes crash with these things on board. They've had planes take off and land with them on board here in this country. They didn't even know they were on the plane. I mean, it's not the Keystone Cops when it comes to the military, but sometimes it's pretty damn close. And when you're talking about game over for everyone, the best way to prevent something happening accidentally or on purpose is by eliminating the risk by getting rid of these damn things. And instead, what are we doing? We're building up. We're
Yeah.
escalating war because of the circumstance in Ukraine. And again, I go back to you. You've been talking about this all along, Brad.
It's true. I mean, we're engaged in a nuclear modernization of the full triad in the United States right now, which is supposed to be over $1 trillion effort. So we're modernizing our nuclear arsenal. There was an excellent documentary on PBS last night at 9 o'clock called The Madman and the Movement. And it was about Richard Nixon and the anti-war movement in Vietnam. And the Nixon madman theory was that he was going to threaten North Vietnam with the use of nuclear weapons in order to get them to the table. And what they were hinting at in the documentary was that it really wasn't a threat. Nixon was actually considering the use of nuclear weapons on North Vietnam. What deterred him were these massive demonstrations that occurred in Washington, D.C. in the fall of 1969. 300,000 and 400,000 people turning out. And he had to alter his plans to use nukes. But again, the United States is the only country that's ever used atomic weapons. So other countries have something to fear from us. And had we used it in North Vietnam, it would have been terrible. It would have been awful. And again, here we are in the Ukraine, and there's threatened use by Russia. Do we threaten use in China with nukes? That's certainly part of a battle strategy. I know that you want to talk later about China, but it seems to me that a lot of the rhetoric coming out of the Pentagon indicates that they may have already decided that a war with China is inevitable.
My God, just the massive humanity over there, the forces that they can arm, the culture of China, and same way with Russia. I mean, this is something you don't want to poke a stick at these folks, and that's what they're talking about. And that situation you mentioned about North Vietnam, with the nuclear, that was discussed. I mean, I don't know if it was on the table officially, but this is not science fiction stuff, folks. There were people, proponents in the Pentagon, promoting that. And people around the world are adversaries, so to speak. How the hell they ever, it's like a hockey game or something like that, how they got to be adversaries. But Russia and China, they're aware of that, as Brad mentioned. So, I mean, we may not remember history, but they sure as hell do. Well, let's bring this up on screen because this stuff is all scary. This is from the Associated Press. Pentagon, budget readies the U.S. for possible China confrontation. What's the most powerful motivator? What's the Oz behind the screen? It's money, folks, and it's the budget. Okay, Washington, Associated Press dateline. The U.S. military must be ready for possible confrontation with China. This is this kind of Spookville reporting that so this is the justification for this. Every word means something, folks. The Pentagon's leader said Thursday, pushing Congress to approve the Defense Department's proposed $842 billion budget, which would modernize the force in Asia and around the world. And it's already the most modern force in the history of the planet, much more modern than remember what I talked about, adversaries. This is a strategy-driven budget, quote, and one driven by the seriousness of our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. Yeah, what's our strategic competition? It's always war, folks. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Oh, my God, this guy's right in the crosshairs of the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. This Lloyd Austin guy that came out of Raytheon. He's the Defense Secretary, and guess what, man? He wants us to buy and prepare and load up on the products that his former employer, that he's probably going to return to if he ever goes back into civilian life, Raytheon, Brad.
That's true. We served a subpoena on Mr. Austin on Valentine's Day of this year because he epitomizes the revolving door between the military, defense contractors. He's now at the Pentagon as Secretary of Defense, where he gets to decide which contracts go to which contractors. And then, of course, he'll return to Raytheon, sit on the board of directors after his term as Secretary of Defense and make large amounts of money. So that is a major concern there. But that language that was in that article, strategic competition.
Yes.
You and I have been around long enough to see that kind of rhetoric used against Iraq in 91 and then against other countries. And it's this sort of slow escalation of language that where they're heading, where they're going with this. And that's what's so concerning about China. Strategic competition, as you say, means war. And the interesting thing about China is they are not really a military competitor of ours. They are an economic competitor of ours. And this is how we meet economic competitors, by preparing for war. We don't invest in our economy. We don't invest in our people. We don't invest in our manufacturing base to try to meet the economic challenge. We invest in our military to try to shut down the economic challenge.
And it's getting, and you think, you want to believe that this isn't the way that things are. It kind of is the way that things are. And I'm getting more ookie kabuki, as I call it all the time, Brad. I want to call people's attention to this. I'm following this story. Brad Taibbi was on Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago talking about these Twitter files, a congressional hearing. While he was on the Hill testifying, literally that day, the IRS was appearing at his doorstep, confronting his family about some 4-year-old tax filing or something like that. What's moving around behind the scenes right now is really scary stuff. I may get to that in a later podcast, but I just saw that, and I would not have believed that, but I'm starting to become a believer. Are they too dumb, or are they in on it?
Yeah, that political repression is there. I mean, democracy in America is very fragile, and it becomes increasingly fragile as the military-industrial complex extends its power. So you speak out the way these individuals do, you are bearing the brunt of the full force of the military-industrial complex, whether it be the IRS or some other kind of charges. You only need look at Julian Assange to see what happens to
people. God, yes. Yeah, military industrial complex, media industrial complex, censorship industrial complex. I don't know how you want to look at it, but it's all interwoven. It's all the same. We got to get moving here. I got to get this story up on screen. Some of the reasons that I wanted to get with Brad this morning. Now, this is just coming out this morning. AP got on board with Zelensky. Literally, they rode on a train with this guy and did the interview here. Again, I don't like the way that the reporting is done here, because it's completely one-sided. And I understand that. You're not going to get the other side on the train with him, but you would think that they would interweave or incorporate or reach out to somebody to counter a little bit of this perspective, or at least put a disclaimer in the article about the one-sidedness of this, because it's Zelensky. And I mean, the dude's at war, if you want to give him a pass, that was brought upon him by Putin. Not much of a pass, certainly, but you got to expect the perspective to reflect that. And this article certainly does. And let me, before we get into that, Brad, I just want to say this. And, in this country, we're at each other's throats because we hate each other's leaders. I mean, the right hates Biden with a passion, his guts and livers, in the same way with the blue no matter who people when they look at Captain Butt Crunch, as I call him over there, Donald Trump. Well, I tell people, when you look at this Zelensky guy, he ain't any better than the people that we got in this country, folks. I mean, he was a ne'er-do-well comedian. Honest to God, that's the truth. I mean, he was instilled with the hands of the CIA all over him after that 2014 coup. He originally campaigned or proposed peace and then backed away from it when his life was threatened by the right wing in his country, those Azov battalions and stuff like that. There are a lot of flag-waving people in this country that think that this guy's some kind of hero. He ain't a hero to me, Brad.
Yeah, if the United States wanted to create a narrative where the Ukraine was the bad guy, that we were in strategic competition with Ukraine, and if they wanted to come up with facts to put before the American public about Ukraine to prove their argument, there would be no shortage of facts to do so. You could say that it's the most corrupt country in Eastern Europe. You could say that it has fascist elements throughout its government and its military. You can say it's controlled by oligarchs, that many of the weapons that go there end up in the hands of bad third parties and things like that. It would be very easy for us to create a really horrific narrative about Ukraine, paint them as the bad guys, and try to wage war against them. It's just that we've decided to pick Ukraine in this fight to go against Russia. So, Ukraine can't be held up as the epitome of democracy the way it is by these mainstream media news reports. They travel with Zelensky on a train, and he's the Winston Churchill of the day. It's insane. I would really encourage people. There's an excellent documentary called War Made Easy, and you've probably seen it with Norman Solomon, and it's all about the media creating this crazy narrative over the years of going to war with different countries. And you really think the Pentagon just sort of selects a country for whatever reason, comes up with a narrative against it, puts it out there in the United States media, we buy it, and we spend our lives and dollars to go to war against these countries.
And they're preying upon the least among us when it comes to intellect. People just don't seem to see through it. I had a show on, I think my last show, I was talking a lot about the comic book world that we live in. And that's kind of the way that this stuff is that we're talking about. It's so simplistic. But my God, maybe they recognize that we're this dumb. Have we always been this dumb? And the internet and media is just revealing it, and the military-industrial complex is just capitalizing on it? Maybe. I think it was at least going back to Eisenhower, because that's what he was seeing. I think he didn't want to say it, and very few people do, but I think it's because he understands that we're so easily preyed upon, and it's because of articles like this. Let me open this thing up and get Brad to talk a little bit about this. I'll open it here with this on board a train from Sumy to Kiev, Ukraine, Associated Press. A team of journalists from the Associated Press spent 2 days traveling by train with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky as he visited the southeastern city of Zaporizhia, which still faces regular shelling from Russian forces, and northern towns in the Sumy region that were liberated shortly after the war began a year ago. The AP is the first news organization to travel extensively with Zelensky since the war began. Here are some takeaways from an interview with Zelensky as he returned to Kiev last Tuesday. Now, this is where I would like to see the disclaimer about it. Be aware, you're going to get a skewed perspective, to say the least. And don't tell me that you can't get the other side, because the AP has contacts and sources in Moscow still. They should. They always have. There are Western correspondents up there, believe it or not. I know one from the Convo Couch, a podcaster that's based in Russia now, on RT up there. I mean, you can always get a second opinion or perspective on this. Maybe you don't include it in this article, but you could tell people that it's coming, or reference or refer them to this. So, okay, Brad, talk about this one. This is where it starts with Zelensky, and starts and ends with him. This is what this guy is harping on. He wants more weaponry from the West.
He does. And it's, started off with small scale ammunition and things like that. Now it's up to tanks and fighter jets and depleted uranium shells. It's going to continue to escalate, as we've been saying for the last year. Now we have nuclear saber rattling going on between the countries. Very, very dangerous kind of situation. That AP story, I agree with what you say. They should have a disclaimer and say what's going to follow now is basically a political statement from a political leader of a country. And that's not a specific slam against Zelensky. That's true for Biden or for any leader.
Yes.
What they're going to say is obviously going to be propaganda, and there should be a counter narrative there. The media is supposed to fact check these things. They no longer do. You always hear in the media where they'll say, a reporter will be out there and they'll say, U.S. officials have concluded, or, U.S. officials have told us. And they use that term, U.S. officials, as if it's God Almighty saying this. I mean, these U.S. officials, again, are in politics, and they're trying to get a particular narrative out there.
And they've been wrong right down the line. You'll tune in CNN and MSNBC. I mean, forget about Fox. My God, there'll be John Brennan and Jim Clapper and all of these people that are proven liars that have been wrong right on down the line. John Bolton gets a seat on camera on CNN. These people, remember the Racing Forum, they've been wrong right down the line. Whether or not you can figure out they have a vested interest and have their tentacles in the production of weaponry like Lloyd Austin, whatever. Just look at it. Just look at their past history. It's wrong. Let me bring this up on screen. So Zelensky was unsparing in his assessment of Russia's Vladimir Putin, calling him an informationally isolated person who had lost everything over the last year of the war. Informationally isolated person. To your point, Brad, the other thing about this is that the media knows. It's been reported on. They understand this. It should be key in their reporting. You talked about propaganda. This is the most propagandized military action war, whatever you want to call it, in the history of humankind. Basically, because of the way the media is and because of the various media sources, the internet, and everything else, all this stuff should be viewed in that context, Brad.
The head of CNN's news bureau, right before the Ukraine war started, sent a letter to the Pentagon asking the Pentagon to supply him with a list of who they believe the best military analysts and officers would be for CNN to retain to report on the Ukraine war. And this news bureau chief was very proud of the fact that he had gone to the Pentagon to get this list, as if this was a list of authoritative officials who would provide objective commentary about the war. So that's the nature of the media and the kind of information we're getting. And I see in that quote there, you know, Zelensky references how isolated Vladimir Putin is. And, you know, I don't know if we have time, but to talk about the International Criminal Court's recent indictment of Putin and how interesting that is, and their failure to indict Bush and Cheney and others, you know, on war crimes for what they've done. Noam Chomsky recently said that there isn't a single president since World War II who was not engaged in war crimes.
Yeah, I had the great Chris Hedges on my show, and what he says is, yeah, everybody wants to couch this in terms of a war crime by Putin for invading Ukraine, which it is. I mean, it's a violation of the Nuremberg Accords or rules or whatever. It is a war crime. And Chris Hedges is the first one to say, yeah, throw his ass in jail. Put him in the cell right next to Bush. Exactly. I mean, that's the way that he, so you got to look at it that way. He doesn't have allies, Zelensky said, adding that it was clear that even China, an economic powerhouse long favorable toward Moscow, was no longer willing to back Russia. Chinese President Xi Jinping recently visited Putin in Russia, but he left without publicly announcing any overt support for Moscow's campaign against Russia. Thank God. Zelensky suggested that Putin's announcement shortly after Xi's visit that he would move tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, we were talking about that earlier, closer to NATO territory, was meant to deflect from the fact that the Chinese leader's visit did not go well. Putin said the move was a counter to Britain's decision to provide more depleted uranium ammunition to Ukraine. We spoke about that briefly. Despite Putin's nuclear provocations, Zelensky said he does not believe the Russian leader is prepared to use the bomb. This is always interesting to me. Quote, if a person wants to save himself, he really will use these. He said, I'm not sure he's ready to do it, says Zelensky. And though Zelensky rides on a train set aside for him and his delegation, it is largely indistinguishable on the outside from the blue and yellow trains ferrying other people and goods across the country. I really like the close of this. Most Ukrainians barely looked up to acknowledge Zelensky's train as it zipped through towns across the countryside, passing picturesque fields and the occasional bombed-out building or bridge. It goes back to that artwork by Carol Hartman that I mentioned earlier, what they're doing to this beautiful breadbasket, this beautiful area in Ukraine. It is being turned into something that's poisoned, and they're talking about cluster bombs. Maybe I'll get to that article here shortly. But what's happening to Ukraine and its people is not to be underestimated, and it's what we talked about from the very beginning. Brad, this is who always suffers. It's the people. They're just going about their lives. They're trying to scratch out a life on the earth here as the train goes by with Zelensky. Hell, they don't even look up.
No, they don't. And it is always the civilians that pay the price. You know, in Iraq, 90% of the casualties were civilians. In Vietnam, 70% of the casualties were civilian. In World War II, 40% of the casualties were civilian. And in World War I, 10% of the casualties were civilians. So there's been this escalation over the last century in warfare where civilians are increasingly paying the price of war. So it's a tragic situation when you see people trying to eke out a living and care for their family and trains zipping by, just talking about war and nuclear weapons and things of that nature. And Zelensky's comment about, you know, Russia being isolated and the visit not going well, China is buying all the fuel and gas from Russia. They continue to support them in the United Nations. Russia recently tried to have that resolution introduced for an investigation about the Nord Stream pipeline. China voted with them, Brazil voted with them, India voted with them, but the other countries in the Security Council voted against it. But to have Brazil, India, and China as your allies, this new BRIC alliance that's being created, that's more than half the world's population right there. That's a pretty good alliance, and that's going to pose a significant strategic competitive threat to the United States economically. They're even talking about creating their own world currency that would challenge the US dollar. And if you put the global South in, which has abstained from all of these UN votes condemning Ukraine, you've got a vast majority of the world's population on board with this idea to, they say they had enough of the United States and Western Europe controlling things.
Yeah, and follow the money, follow the banking. I mean, that's what we always talk about here on the show. Yeah, and the other thing about it is, and you mentioned very briefly, this Nord Stream 2 thing is very interesting to me. I've brought this up on the show before, not only because of what it is, and look at the great Seymour Hersh's reporting. You got to go to Substack to find the article almost. This guy that was, again, look at the Racing Form. This guy's been correct right down the line when it comes to the Vietnam War. He reported on My Lai when it came to Watergate. He was one of the lead reporters at the New York Times for that. He was right about Abu Ghraib. I mean, the list goes on and on. Seymour Hersh, this Nord Stream 2 thing is really chilling to me, Brad, not only because of the circumstances and what it is and all the war crime situation, all that kind of stuff, but it's because it's kind of like this Matt Taibbi thing that I was talking about. When you see these powers that be stabbing you in the front instead of the back, I mean, you can blame yourself if you're too dumb to look behind you. But when they're coming right at you with this, putting it right in your face and doing it otherwise, the worst industrial sabotage incident in the history of humankind, the worst ecological sabotage in the history of the planet, and in itself, an act of war. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. You look closely at this, the United States is responsible for it. It's a Rosetta Stone for me, Brad. It is really chilling stuff.
It is. I mean, think about what the U.S. reaction would be if Russia blew up the Alaska pipeline or something like this.
Yes.
The Nord Stream pipeline was the most expensive infrastructure project that Russia had. And the evidence seems pretty clear that the United States, along with NATO countries, mined it, detonated the mines, exploded it, causing this enormous rupture of gas and a cutoff of fuel to Western Europe. So that is an act of war. If you were Vladimir Putin and you saw that happen, you would think, good Lord, the United States just did that to my country, to this infrastructure project that we paid billions of dollars for. And they did it blatantly. And Seymour Hersh, as you say, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, writes this story. It's not even recognized in the New York Times or mainstream media for 2 weeks, not even a glance at it. And then when it is, it's quickly condemned. And then the United States government comes up with the counter narratives trying to say that
Did you see that?
Pro-Ukrainian forces somehow dove 300 feet deep to do the most complicated naval mining exercise in history. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah, with these C4 explosives or whatever they call it on a boat that is similar to the SS Minnow with the Gilligan's Island, two people on board. I mean, they're stabbing you in the front. I mean, I look at that and say, my God, it isn't just the act itself. It's the fact that they're so blatantly lying in such a stupid way. I mean, it's the old analogy, pissing down my back and telling me that it's raining. Man, I can't stand for that. I don't want that. Okay, we're going to run out of time here. This article I wanted to get to, because this again goes to Ukraine. I don't want it to happen again. Don't send cluster bombs to Ukraine. Just look at Laos. And this is written by Sarah, I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name here. In my birth country, since the last bomb was dropped 50 years ago, only 1% of the contaminated area has been cleared, posing danger to children walking to school and farmers working their land. Again, everybody forgets this, but I don't. I've talked about it on my show a lot. My God, Brad, that was 50 years ago. That's what's happening in Laos today. And that's what is happening in Ukraine, because there is a question raging as to whether the United States should supply Ukraine with cluster munitions. They keep resurfacing. Although the Biden administration doesn't seem to be considering this request, it's not a solid no. The president's answer should be simple and clear. Absolutely not. And I would suspect, and we got to keep moving here, but I would suspect that this is something that Zelensky would be all up with. This is kind of support weaponry that he would like to have. My God, cluster bombs blowing up people in Laos, blowing up limbs. 1% of the area cleared 50 years later.
Yeah, a friend of mine here in Lancaster heads up a group that goes to Laos and has been going to Laos for the last 50 years to help clean out landmines. So 50 years of that work, and they're not even close to getting them all. Another friend of mine, Kathy Kelly, who works on the Merchants of Death Tribunal with me, was in Iraq during shock and awe, saw the cluster bombs there, met with the victims, children mostly, who pick up the pieces of cluster bombs because they're brightly colored and look like toys, and pick them off. They go off and they lose limbs as a result of these horrible weapons. So they should not be used anywhere.
Oh, God. Who are we? We're chimpanzees beating on a rock with a stick. A lot of times I think we're not as smart as chimpanzees, folks. Honest to God, we put that stuff in our own backyard. And that takes us to really the genesis why I wanted to get with Brad. And we've got a few minutes here. I wanted to talk about this outstanding article that he wrote on ZNet, Staying Alive in a Country of Death. Where's the country of death, folks? Well, it would be right here. Brad writes, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. End quote. Remember that one? So screamed the character Howard Beale in the 1976 movie Network, a prescient commentary on the corporate capture and slow suffocation of America. Howard was a primetime news anchor who'd had enough. To some of his viewers, he was having a mental breakdown on national television. To others, he saw the country as clearly as a prophet, saw it for exactly what it was, a fetid cabal of the rich obsessed with money at the expense of human life and dignity. And so this is, go to ZNet and check this out. I mean, this is an outstanding article. There's a screen grab of old Howard there. It was a great movie. But again, I don't know, on a lot of different levels, and this is a great article, and you get into a lot of the deepness of this, Brad, but whoever put that movie together knew this back then. I mean, this, again, is something that's been with us for years, if not for decades, but here we are today staring down the doomsday clock, Brad.
We are, and I saw that movie 2 or 3 weeks ago for the first time. I remember when it came out. I was 13 years old when it came out, and I remember that phrase, I'm mad as hell.
Yeah.
But our kids were home, and so we watched that movie, and it was so prescient in terms of its commentary on mainstream media, but also in terms of the contempt that the media and the military and politicians have for the American public, the way they treat us. There is a denial of life in that kind of culture that goes on there. It's a death culture in a death country. And when we talk cavalierly about nuclear weapons, and when we talk about depleted uranium, and when we talk about hundreds of thousands of Iraqi casualties, 90% of the casualties being civilians, that is all part of this country of death that I was trying to get across to people. And what they want you to do is tune out, surrender, just say this corporate media complex, military complex is so overwhelming. We need to acquiesce. We need to surrender. I was giving a talk on Sunday, and one of the individuals said, how do we continue to hope in the face of such an onslaught? You know, it's so powerful. The odds are so against us. And the idea is, you know, if you acquiesce, if you surrender, you are surrendering to death. You're surrendering to a culture of death, spiritual death, physical death, whatever you want to characterize it all. And to resist every day, to just wake up in the morning and to say that you're going to resist that in whatever way you can, and whether it's writing articles or George doing your show or whatever it may be, that affirms life. You are affirming life. You're saying no to death and yes to life. And that's something, in order to retain our humanity, that's something we have to do every single day.
And I put it to a lot of people feel so hopeless, particularly people on the left that are voting Democratic because they know it'll come down the pike with an idiot like Donald Trump if he gets back in. The way that I put it to people is, like Brad says, resist, do something, anything, contribute to the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. Go to that event that they're having out there that we started the show with. Those are excellent things. The other thing that's very easily done, I mean, very easily done, when these people contact you, these warmongers contact you to contribute, to donate to political parties and candidates, tell them no, not this time. Why?
Right.
because there won't be a next time if you people don't do something about this runaway military spending and this war in Ukraine. Get your ass over there, sit down with somebody, and get this thing settled. And I ain't going to give you a dime unless you do that, because there won't be a next time. I like that because it rhymes, Brad.
That's very good. Yeah, it is very good. Yeah, write letters to the editor, call your congressman, talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, write a poem, do whatever you can. I mean, there are things that can be done out there. If you want to take to the streets, you want to protest, go ahead and do that. Here in Lancaster County, there are, I think, 30 different private contractors that have contracts with the Pentagon. So the Pentagon is very good at seeding different congressional districts with their largesse. And so that's happening here in Lancaster County. We could pick any one of those contractors to hold a vigil outside, try to talk to the employees and say, do you realize that you're contributing to a death culture here? Can't this company economically convert to life-sustaining products? Try to work with your fellow colleagues in this company and make that happen. So I think there's any one of a number of things that can be done. We don't have to go to prison. We don't have to do what we've seen these other, great activists do, because that can be very intimidating and just make us feel a sense of defeat. Every one of us can write a letter to the editor. Every one of us can pick up the phone and call our congressman. We can talk to our neighbors and everybody else. But we have to do something to resist. We can't give up.
All right, there's the URL. I'm going to put that up on screen once more. And I also want to get to this because Brad was talking about writing and poetry and stuff. I mean, he's a great writer, and check this out on ZNet and the other places that it will appear. I love to read these closing paragraphs because you know how to put a finish on things, Brad. This is the Minwax, folks. The only way to live authentically in a country of death is to resist, because it is in resisting that we retain our humanity, no matter the odds against us, no matter the outcome. Being fully human means resisting death in all its forms. It means peacemaking. We have hope because we have the power to resist. And that is a remarkable power. When exercised properly, it not only shivers the state, but affirms all of life. And that goes back to, he was talking about those throngs of people in the Vietnam War. I mean, Richard Nixon didn't do that willingly. Hell, he would like to have stayed in office, I think, with a secret plan to end the war and have himself get reelected. FDR didn't do what he did back, because of... he even said so. I mean, they made me do it. I mean, they were these counter forces. I mean, the socialists and the communists and that, but they were going to take it if he didn't give it to them. And so he did. And that's what you got to make these people believe. That's what we're going to have to do, particularly in the world that we live in today, or it ain't going to happen. Brad, I want to give you last word here because we're going to run out of time for the show. But thanks for that great article and being on the show today. But give us a closer here.
Sure. Thank you. And I would just emphasize, don't feel defeated. Don't acquiesce. Don't surrender, because you're surrendering your humanity. So you can save yourself. You can save your family. You can save your spirit, your soul, by acts of resistance. And please wake up each morning and try to just think about what you're going to do. What small act, what large act you can do to resist this culture of death.
That's great. We'll circle back again sooner than I would like, because I would like to see all of this get resolved and the situation in Ukraine get settled, which it will. We got to get started, though. The longer we wait, the higher the body count gets. All of those people are dead, and it exacerbates the situation. People need to understand that. The more losses on both sides of what will eventually be the negotiating table means the longer it will take for anything substantial to get done, because of exactly that. What's happened, Brad? I hope it happens soon, but I'm not overly optimistic right now.
I hope so too. I would love to go back to hiking and all the joyful things. I'm sure you'd love to play hockey and everything else, but there is work to be done.
There's a lot of work to be done. Okay, let's go ahead and say a bit adieu to Brad Wolf. Folks, I hope you like having him on the show. Brad Wolf is the executive director and founder of the Peace Action Network, Lancaster, PA. He is a former prosecutor, so he knows what he's doing with the War Crimes Tribunal. I mean, there's his, go to there. I've had that URL up on screen several times, www.merchantsofdeath.org. Go there. participate in this, play a role in it. It ain't that hard. Throw them a few bucks. That's what I'm going to do when I get off the air today. He's a lawyer and community college dean. He's head of the Emergence of Death War Crimes Tribunal here. I don't know, maybe about a year or so, trying to do what he can. And folks, if you like Podcast by George, if you like the, what we try to get done on this show, go to podcastbygeorge.com. That's the easy way to sign up on all the platforms. Facebook and YouTube are there. Like today, give us a thumbs up, share this show, leave us a comment, follow us on Facebook. And of course, if you just like the audio and you just want to check that out, and, that's really good if you're out riding a bike here as it warms up, hopefully. Go to iTunes. iTunes has the show there, but you can also get us on just any platform that carries audio podcasts, basically Spotify, the radio app, Deezer, Stitcher, all those kind of places. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast